On November 22, 1963, two men died within hours of each other. One of them was the 35th President of the United States. The other was the man who may have predicted, more accurately than anyone alive, how power would ultimately consume the modern world. Almost nobody noticed the second death. His name was Aldous Huxley. He was 69 years old, bedridden with laryngeal cancer, in his home in the Hollywood Hills, unable to speak. At some point that morning, he picked up a writing tablet and scratched out a request to his wife Laura. It said, LSD, 100 micrograms, intramuscular. Laura went to the medicine cabinet to retrieve the drug. When she returned, she found the doctor and nurses gathered around the television in the next room. She assumed it was some ordinary program. She administered the first injection at 11:45 in the morning, knelt beside her husband, and began speaking softly into his ear, guiding him forward, telling him he was going toward the light. She gave him a second dose several hours later. At 5:20 in the afternoon, Aldous Huxley died. It was only then that Laura learned what had been on the television. John F. Kennedy had been shot in Dallas. The 35th President of the United States had been pronounced dead at 1 p.m. Two of the most consequential deaths of the 20th century happened on the same afternoon, in the same country, within 4 hours of each other. One of them became the defining event of a generation. The other passed almost unnoticed, buried under the weight of a nation's grief. That in itself is the unknown story behind the story of Aldous Huxley. He spent his entire life warning the world about how power obscures the things it does not want you to see. And on the day he died, history demonstrated exactly that. To truly grasp Aldous Huxley's profound insights, we must first delve into his origins, understanding the very foundations from which he emerged. Born in 1894, Huxley entered one of England's most distinguished intellectual families, a lineage steeped in academic excellence and societal influence. His grandfather was Thomas Henry Huxley, the renowned biologist, famously known as Darwin's bulldog for his fierce defense of evolution. This intellectual legacy continued with his brother, Julian Huxley, who would become the first Director General of UNESCO. Julian played a pivotal role in shaping the intellectual architecture of the post-war world, extending the family's influence globally. Aldous Huxley was far more than just a novelist. He was the culmination of a dynasty. His family had spent generations at the intersection of science, power, and the meticulous management of human knowledge. Huxley's own education began at the prestigious Eton College, a cornerstone of British intellectual tradition. He then advanced to Oxford, where he distinguished himself by earning a first-class degree in English literature. During his time at Oxford, and through the vibrant Bloomsbury literary circle, he found himself in esteemed company. He moved among literary giants like H.G. Wells, Virginia Woolf, T.S. Eliot, and D.H. Lawrence, forging powerful connections. These were not merely literary friendships. They represented a world where the written word held immense power. The written word was understood as one of the most potent instruments of political influence ever devised, shaping public opinion and policy. Following his time at Oxford, Huxley briefly returned to Eton College, this time as a teacher. Among his students was a young man named Eric Arthur Blair, who would later adopt the pen name George Orwell. Remarkably, two of the most consequential dystopian novels in literary history would be penned by this teacher and his former student. They would each describe different versions of the same nightmare, offering unique perspectives on societal control. One nightmare was built on fear and brute force, a world of constant surveillance and punishment. The other, more insidious, was built on pleasure and willing compliance, a society where freedom was subtly surrendered for comfort. Huxley graduated into a world engulfed by war, witnessing the devastating impact of World War I firsthand. He watched an entire generation of young men disappear into the brutal trenches, their lives consumed by the conflict. He observed the machinery of propaganda meticulously manufacturing consent for slaughter on an industrial scale. This experience profoundly shaped his understanding of power and control. By the time the war finally ended, Huxley had gained a chillingly clear understanding of how institutions manipulate and suppress information. He understood what institutions do with information they deem dangerous, and how they control narratives to maintain their authority. The book that was never supposed to be a warning. In 1931, Aldous Huxley wrote Brave New World in 4 months, publishing it in 1932. It was a satirical response to H.G. Wells' utopian fiction, which imagined scientific progress and human perfection. Huxley found that vision naive, and his own word, horrifying. His novel describes a future where humans are engineered in labs, conditioned from birth into social castes, kept compliant by soma, distracted by endless entertainment, casual sex, and manufactured happiness. No concentration camps, no secret police, no boot on the face. Citizens are perfectly satisfied. They are engineered to love their own servitude. The response was immediate. Wells felt attacked, stating Huxley had no right to betray the future. Critics called it immoral and dangerous. It was banned in Ireland and on school lists for decades. The irony was not lost on Huxley. He wrote about suppressing thought, and his book was suppressed. The question for Huxley: was Brave New World a warning or a blueprint? In 1949, George Orwell published 1984, depicting external oppression, surveillance, and brute force. The totalitarianism Huxley saw emerging in the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany. Orwell sent Huxley a copy, and Huxley wrote back. The letter, dated October 21, 1949, is a crucial document, yet rarely read. Huxley praised Orwell's vision, but argued he got the future wrong. Ruling oligarchies would find less arduous ways than brute force to govern. No need to ban books. People would stop wanting to read them. No need to inflict pain. They would manufacture pleasure instead. Huxley believed 1984's nightmare would modulate into his Brave New World vision. Orwell died in January 1950, less than 3 months after receiving a letter. It is not known whether he ever replied. In 1937, Aldous Huxley left England for the United States. He traveled with his wife Maria, his son Matthew, and friend Gerald Hurd. Maria's health required a warm, dry climate. Huxley's pacifism made him unwelcome in an England moving toward war. He settled in Los Angeles, where Hollywood studios paid handsomely for screenwriters, and a community of exiles gathered. He did not return to England as a permanent resident. He spent the remainder of his life in California. What Huxley did in America in the post-war years is the part of his biography that receives the least scrutiny. He moved through networks of scientists, psychologists, and researchers who were quietly asking questions about the human mind. Questions that official institutions were not yet prepared to ask publicly. He explored Vedanta, meditation, and the emerging science of consciousness. He corresponded with psychiatrists, philosophers, and government researchers. In 1952, the CIA launched a program called mkultra. Its purpose was to investigate whether the human mind could be controlled through chemical means. The drug of primary interest was lysergic acid diethylamide, better known as LSD, which had been synthesized in 1938 by Albert Hofmann at Sandoz Laboratories in Switzerland. The man who introduced Huxley to LSD was named Al Hubbard. Their meeting took place on Christmas Eve 1955 at Huxley's home in the Hollywood Hills. In Huxley's correspondence, Hubbard appears as a remarkable and generous facilitator of psychedelic experience. What Huxley's letters do not mention, and what Huxley may not have fully known, was that Hubbard had served time in federal prison for alcohol smuggling and had subsequently worked as an operative for a precursor organization to the CIA. He moved through the early psychedelic research world with access, resources, and government connections. connections that he never fully disclosed to the researchers he was supplying. Huxley's own name appears in documents connected to the mkultra era. The precise nature of his involvement remains contested. What is not contested is that Huxley was at the center of a network where LSD research, government intelligence interests, and the emerging counterculture of the 1960s intersected. His brother Julian was simultaneously shaping global intellectual institutions through UNESCO. The Huxley family was not simply observing the post-war world. They were present at its most consequential experiments. In 1954, Huxley published The Doors of Perception, his account of his first mescaline experience. It became one of the most influential texts of the 20th century. It was also, in retrospect, the moment Huxley crossed from warning the world about the weaponization of pleasure and perception to actively participating in an experiment whose full implications he may not have understood. Or perhaps he understood them entirely. The book nobody read. In 1962, 1 year before his death, Aldous Huxley published his final novel. It was called Island. He considered it the most important work of his life. Almost nobody read it. Island is the inverse of Brave New World, where Brave New World described a world engineered for servitude. Island described a world engineered for liberation. The fictional island of Pala had built a society that integrated Eastern philosophy with Western science, used psychedelic medicine not as an instrument of control, but as a tool for human awakening, and had managed to resist the predatory interests of global capitalism and militarism. The novel ends with Pala's destruction. An oil company, working with a compliant local ruler, engineers an invasion. The utopia is extinguished. The final pages are among the most quietly devastating in 20th century literature. Huxley had worked on Island for years. He had rescued the manuscript from the fire that destroyed his home in May of 1961, escaping with little else. He considered it the answer to Brave New World, the demonstration that the alternative he had always believed in was possible. The literary establishment largely ignored it. Critics called it didactic. Readers were not interested. The book that Huxley believed was his most important contribution to human thought was published 1 year before his death and quietly buried. The man who spent his life warning the world about the suppression of dangerous ideas watched his most hopeful idea suppressed by indifference. By 1960, Huxley had been diagnosed with laryngeal cancer. By November 1963, he could no longer speak. He communicated by writing notes on a tablet. On the morning of November 22nd, he wrote his request to Laura. She administered the first injection at 11:45 a.m. She knelt beside him and spoke into his ear. Go, let go, darling. Forward and up. You are going toward the light." Doctors and nurses present later told Laura they had never seen a person die so completely without pain and struggle. In her letter to Julian Huxley, Laura called it the most beautiful death. Aldous Huxley died as he had lived, on the frontier of human consciousness, guided out of the world by the same substance that had defined his intellectual life. On the same afternoon, in Dallas, Texas, John F. Kennedy was shot. The nation's attention went entirely, and understandably, to Dallas. Huxley's death received brief notices in the literary press and was largely forgotten. The man who had spent 30 years warning the world about distraction died on the one day when the world had a reason to be maximally distracted. Whether that was coincidence or something else is the question Aldous Huxley would have known how to ask. That is the unknown story behind the story.